Okay, thank you for your patience. Thank you again for making it out this early after such a late evening last night. I know it's not always easy, but I think your diligence will be rewarded by the conversation that we'll have on stage, of course, and the conversation we hope to have with the room as this session progresses. We're here today to talk about transport technology at the service of society. Now, we often focus on technology, or rather on technologies, as things, as objects, as tools that are created to accomplish tasks that hopefully unburden our lives. And that is often the case. But it's worth noting that technologies, while always constructed, are not always new, nor are they on their own necessarily able to generate impactful innovation. The dustbins of history are littered with technologies that held promise but never gained traction, with inventions that promised to change the world but never achieved meaningful scale, or that rapidly faded into obsolescence. So I will open by saying that technology on its own is not a meaningful construct from a policy perspective. What is meaningful is how the development, or more often the combination of technologies, gives rise to innovative services which allow people to do things better or to do things they cannot previously imagine, contributing to changes in their behavior, which then shift the context for policy, which is a central concern for those that here are at the International Transport Forum today. Peter Paul Verbeek, the Dutch philosopher of technology, notes that just as we shape technology, it shapes us as well. But I would add, it does not shape us all in equal measure. And sometimes it shapes us in ways that some cannot or can only difficultly be shaped. So we will talk about technology today, but not just with the prism of the technologies themselves, but through the prism of the behaviors that technologies enable, and a focus on who benefits from these technologies and for whom the uptake of these technologies may create or exacerbate exclusion. And to do this today, we have a panel of 4 experts that we've curated to lead this conversation on stage about the role of technology and how it can contribute to better outcomes in society. In the second to my left is Hyun-Se Lee. He is the European Business Development Manager at Autocrypt. His role is to ensure that OEMs, tier suppliers, and mobility service providers understand the crucial need for secure mobility as we move into the future of connected and autonomous transportation. Next to him is Connie Llanos. She is the Chief of Staff and Strategy and Assistant General Manager for the Los Angeles Department of Transportation. In that role, she oversees public engagement, communications, government relations, employee engagement and performance, and equity initiatives for the nation's second largest municipal transportation agency. She is also a storyteller, which is one of the most fundamental skills that we in the policy sector need to have to be able to change people's minds and engage new behaviors. Joost van Tom, at the end, is CEO of ITS Europe, Urtico. Before this, he was the Smart Mobility Director of ASEA for over 5 years. Joost holds positions as chair of the Strategy Committee of Urtico ITS Europe, as well as a member of its supervisory board before he became president. He served also as a member of the board of the European Mobility as a Service Alliance, the MaaS Alliance in Europe. And finally, Laura Williamson, closest to me, is Director of Membership and Institutional Partnerships for REN21, the Renewable Energy Policy Network of the 21st century, the century that we are now in. Over her career, Laura has co-authored numerous reports on the sustainability of energy systems and the contribution of renewables to increased climate and environmental protection. My name is Philippe Christ. I'm advisor for innovation and foresight at the International Transport Forum. Again, welcome to this room, and let's start this panel, and I'll turn to Connie first. The Los Angeles Department of Transport is a world leader in applying an equity perspective on the way in which you are guiding the deployment of new transport technologies and services in LA. Can you describe how you're addressing fundamental equity issues via your approach to universal basic mobility?
Thank you for that question, and good morning. Well, equity is at the center and at the core of how the department has done its business for quite some time. And some of that is by the nature of the communities that we serve. You know, Los Angeles is a large city, but it is a city that also has embedded within it significant inequities. It was a city that was built in a way that actually perpetuated some of those inequities, where we had things like freeway construction go through particular communities, really eliminating some of the real estate and generational wealth of certain communities, and really prohibiting and limiting the economic development of some to the benefit of others. So when you think about some of our core programs, when you think about our neighborhood transit system and how we determine where we're going to deploy our routes, when you think about our scooter program, largest in the nation, where we're using technology to ensure that it's deployed equitably. When you think about even our Vision Zero work, our street safety work, that is inherently driven not only by the data on where there is the most vulnerability for crashes and deaths, but it is also driven by decision making about the infrastructure and where it's going to go, is driven by other statistics like poverty. And lack of access to vehicles, which we know is going to, ultimately create more vulnerable users and a larger risk for death. Universal mobility is sort of a natural transition for how we actually combine all of these efforts through one lens. And ultimately, it is about accepting that as transportation providers, our number one role is how do we leverage the capacity of transportation to create opportunity? Because ultimately, if you cannot access mobility, if you cannot get from point A to point B, you have significant barriers to everything from education, jobs, even things that just contribute to a sense of dignity and a life well lived, like being able to visit your relatives or being able to take part in recreation. Those are significantly impacted when you don't have the ability to access transportation. And we know that in LA we have tremendous barriers to mobility. In fact, still in Los Angeles, you can access 12 times the number of jobs if you own a vehicle than if you don't. So for us, the deployment of universal basic mobility through the targeted and intentional deployment of physical infrastructure, digital infrastructure, and community infrastructure is absolutely about getting to the core of what we believe should be the mission of all transportation providers, which is how do you actually level the playing field and make it easier for people to get from point A to point B.
Connie, you've just described what you do. I'm going to have a quick follow-up question. I'm interested in exactly how you did it, because LA was among one of the first cities in the world, with Toronto and Singapore, to have a mobility technology plan. And very quickly you, not the others yet, pivoted to this inclusion and this equity perspective. Can you share a little bit of how that happened internally? How were you able to bring these arguments up to the point where the mayor's office decided, yes, this is how we want to frame technology in our city?
I think that Los Angeles is sort of a magnet for creativity and innovation. We're also a huge global marketplace for so many companies. So we understood pretty quickly the rapid evolution of transportation through technology. And we also understood that Los Angeles was going to be an inviting place for that innovation to take place. And it was something we wanted to encourage, right? When you have large challenges and barriers, complex problems, you want to invite that innovation in and that technology in to help you solve those concerns. But we also could not free ourselves of the understanding that those equity concerns remained. And quickly, we understood that a lot of the technology was being deployed through the lens of solving problems for some, not necessarily all. And so you have to ask yourself, is it a technological innovation for the sake of innovation, or is it actually solving those complex problems? And so we quickly, understood that we had to have a clear set of equity goals and outcomes in mind, and that we had to work with our private sector partners to, in many cases, educate them on what these concerns were, help inform their next steps, their business plans, by really clearly articulating what our biggest needs were, and two, by deploying tools that allow us to actually hold private sector and public sector accountable for delivering on those equity outcomes that we're looking for.
And you overcame one of the greatest challenges that we often face in this realm, especially when we work for elected officials. You were able to bring your mayor on board and bring him into that.
Yeah, thank you for flagging that again. I think, with policymakers, in particular when you're talking about technology, it's really important to make the information relatable. You need to articulate how the innovation is actually solving the problems that they're the most concerned about. And I think with our mayor, with our elected council members, I think we were able to explain, for example, with the deployment of scooters, at the end of the day, we as a city have created these incredible goals for ourselves for how we want to decarbonize our city and address our climate change policies. We need options and choices for our community, or we will never get there. In Los Angeles, almost 90% of our residents own a single occupancy vehicle. It is a reality. Our city has sprawl. If people don't have options that are convenient for them, then we're never going to get to the goals that we have, no matter how many plans or policies we release and unveil. So I think it's about making it real, in real terms and human terms, that really can sway the public conversation. I also will say that as much as it is about educating our policymakers, it is also about educating community, the users, because then once they're bought in, they believe that the advancement is actually going to work for them, then you sway the public opinion, and the policymakers come with that.
So the policymakers, the community, there's another essential element in this rollout of new technologies, and that's the private sector, of course. And I'm going to turn to Hyun-Se Lee, who is one of the representatives of the private sector working in data security and now mobility as a service, deploying different types of integration systems in Korea and outside of Korea in an international context. Now, you, in our discussions ahead of time, from a company perspective, surprisingly said, we really believe in universal mobility. We have this concept of universal mobility. Can you discuss how you hope to deliver this universal mobility, how you can contribute to delivering that universal mobility, and how you hope to overcome some of the barriers to providing that universal mobility?
In terms of universal mobility, we do think that there are two main barriers that we face right now. First one is a systemic one, where we have the lack of maybe public awareness or public initiatives to pursue those universal mobility. But what we want to focus on right here is about the financial barriers that we face, not only for the individuals, but for the public institutions or governments or in the private sectors that are driving the switch to the universal mobility. And what we think that is building up this financial barrier is that we do not operate the transportation systems based on the connectivity. And we do have this, we say that disconnected connectivity by connectivity in trains, connectivity in cars, connectivity in scooters, connectivity in e-bikes and so on. But we do not have the connectivity as a transportation system itself. So we have been pursuing a lot in connectivity and advancements in vehicles, which is a transportation means, but we do see we need to make a transition to overcome this barrier as a transportation itself, not the vehicle themselves. So this is where we try to really move forward.
And one of the things that you can bring to this equation is how, from your company's perspective, from your sector's perspective, how can you deploy technologies that allow that integration, especially that digital integration? Is this something that you find in your work that is well understood when you interact with policymakers who may focus more on physical infrastructure?
So there has been a lot of plans or initiatives to really develop new infrastructures physically, but we just see that we need to actually leverage the existing infrastructures and digitalize it by making connectivity possible. But it is quite challenging for, I don't think this is like applicable for all governments, but some of the regional governments do think that the physical investments must come first rather than actually digitalizing the existing infrastructures and making connectivity possible. So yeah, that is one of the challenges that we have as a network and cybersecurity firm and expert group. And to continue on that, what we see as a networked transportation is that we have been pouring a lot of resources in developing autonomous vehicles and safer vehicles and so on to make, or inclusive vehicles themselves to make transportation technology serve for the society. But I think we have also to focus on the smart infrastructures that can actually connect to those connected vehicles and transportation means themselves. So I think it has to go both sides, because as you have already know that the OEMs and tier suppliers and other e-mobility creators have been rapidly pursuing the higher levels of autonomy to make those kind of transportations possible where the legacy vehicles could not reach, but it has been lagging down. So yeah.
Joost, I'd like to pivot to you and talk a little bit about how you view the fundamental infrastructure task in transport and related to technology. So historically, we have focused in the transport sector, and especially on the public sector side, on providing connective infrastructure, pouring concrete, pouring asphalt, building bridges, making roads, tunnels, rail systems, ports, airports, all these things that allow people to connect to each other and connect to opportunity, the physical material infrastructure that we all know and use. And now it seems that we haven't always used that infrastructure very efficiently. The vehicles that use that infrastructure aren't terribly efficient in their use of that. And we realize there's a tremendous reservoir of efficiencies that can only be exploited by better integrating those services that are operating on this connective infrastructure. How do you see, Joost, the data infrastructure that would allow this integration versus this physical infrastructure? And clearly in the past, we understood there was a public role in providing that physical infrastructure. What's your views on the balance between the public sector and the private sector in forming and shaping and guiding and providing that digital infrastructure, that data infrastructure that allows integration?
Thank you, Philip. First, thank you to the OECD, to ITF for organizing this. This is my first time, so thank you as CEO of Vertigo. It's a great question for the 9 o'clock in the morning, so be prepared. I see you're all awake. Now, the good news is I worked 12 years in telecommunications and data and also in European circles, and 5 years for OEMs, the European OEMs at Brussels, and now in Vertigo, bringing the dots together. So what we do is actually connecting these dots. Yeah? A vehicle today is just one instrument. It's an IoT device, actually, as we speak. Cyber secured, hopefully, and connected and automated up to autonomous. Now it's two to tango on this. You need the roads, at least for the road transport, you need the roads and everything that goes with the roads, so the physical attributes of the roads, lane markings, traffic signs, more and more smart traffic signs, and traffic lights, etc. That's the physical infrastructure. Now, with the European Commission, we've been thinking a lot on how can we cope and cooperate between the physical and the digital reality. Because these vehicles and also the scooters and the other things that the VRUs are using, the vulnerable road users, they're using these as an instrument to go from one point to another point. They don't care with what they are driving, as long as they are driving from point A to point B. So the switching function is getting higher thanks to a MaaS and other things. The same for transport of goods. It's not only about people, it's also about transport as a service. So getting goods from an OEM factory to the warehousing, to the ships, to the containers, to all, and the last mile delivery, it takes also the need to have more and more digitization, not only of documents, that's one, that's a document flow, ECMR is one of them at the United Nations, but secondly, to have a perfect infrastructure allowing you to do that from a digital point of view. So with the Commission, we've been thinking, how can we smartize the roads? How can we get more information from the road authorities and the road operators? So we've been discussing the physical attributes of a road. How can we digitize this? How can we put this in a digital twin? Because an automated vehicle in the future, L3, 4, and 5, L3, for example, in Germany is now type approvable. So this vehicle is still reliant on HD maps, on information, on AI, on activation of system based on the perception of external information. That external information that the vehicle will have to capture and interpret is lane markings, is road signs, is barriers, is things in the way, and that vehicle will have to detect what is it. Is it a person? Is it something, an obstacle? Is it the end of queue or the beginning of a queue, etc.? What are the weather conditions? So if the wiper goes on and off, or if the ESP is going on, if the loss of traction is there from the wheel, that might be an interesting raw information for the road authority, but also for the vehicle manufacturer and the city, because that indicates that there is actually a weather condition that is not optimal. So if you could foresee the other vehicles with that information, if you can provide that information to the guys behind you, but also to the vulnerable road users, you will have information that you would never have had in the past. Because in the past, relatively past, you only have the information instantly when you drive, you see an accident, you see something, you feel the weather conditions. Now you get this information much in advance. And the vehicle will be, not only vehicle, but also vehicles will be much more intelligent. Yeah? And that's the purpose of the digital infrastructure. Now, what do we need for all this? Yeah? It's a good copy of the physical infrastructure, so that digital twins, ideally with the right metadata, that we know what language are we talking about. Is it about speed? Is it about weather conditions, about friction? So at least we know what category of data we're talking about. But secondly, it should be interoperable. And that's a big question, of course. Everybody is building its own infrastructure, its own silo, monopoly issue, and they're all the best. But there's no interoperability. At least there's not assured, there's not ensured. Yeah? So the role of a governmental authority, be it regional like Europe or international like the UNEC, BP29 for example, and a CD at the local level, is to assure interoperability and compatibility of communication systems and data sets and so on, so that we talk the same language and we talk the same data. We can, machine readable data, we can put it from the road into our own, whatever private owned systems. That's one, that's a difficult one. I mean, that takes time. So we did it for traffic management with DATEX2, for example. That's a European standard. ISO is working on other standards. For example, also on AVP, automated valet parking, we have ISO standards now coming on. The second thing is about data. Who is going to build a mobility data space? In Europe, we're now talking of a mobility data space next to the many other data spaces. What will be the perfect governance of this? Should it be publicly organized? Should it be privately organized? Should it be open or closed? And so that discussion we have it right now. Yeah? And there should not be one mobility data space. There will be an interconnectivity and interoperability. And who will run this? That's a big question. Will it be the hyperscalers? Not sure. Will it be a European institution? Will it be an agency? Or will it be the private sector that has I would say, a cooperative system? Question mark. But the winner takes it all sometimes in these rapid evolving technologies. So we need to be care that it's inclusive and affordable. Yeah? So that's the role of the private-public investment also, giving impetus for investment, because 5G, wonderful, but we don't need 5G for all the applications, by the way. We need 4G, okay, fine, but what about 5G in the regional outskirts, in the deserts, not where the highways are, but not the cities? We will not have interoperability of technologies. And what about backwards compatibility is another one. You have a legacy fleet or a legacy, I would say, application with technology that works fine, and then suddenly you have a new technology that is not able to talk with the previous technology. So you hijack everybody that has the old technology. What do you do there in terms of inclusion and interoperability? So just a couple of ideas.
A lot of what you describe relates to how do we organize ourselves to monitor and govern digital spaces. And that, by governing, I mean sometimes thinking about how we need to govern differently, better, in a new way, or sometimes step back from the way in which we regulate. A follow-up question to you, Joost, is we understand how to govern public space. We don't always do it well, but what happens on streets, on sidewalks, what can happen in the facades of buildings, where trees can be planted on the roadway, we understand that, and we have models and principles to guide us in that way. Do you feel that we have adequate principles and models to describe the governance of digital public spaces? This work that you're saying that is undergoing at the EU, part of that work is trying to emerge some consensus around the model of governance in digital spaces. What's your feeling on where we stand on that right now?
That's a great question. I was part of the B2G and B2B data sharing group of the Commission to build these data acts that we now have, the Draft Data Act. It's a bit like the GDPR. We want to have a European standard on data sharing, access to data and data sharing real time. And one of the questions was, how inclusive should we be and how open should we be? And one of the key principles that is in this draft act is the FRAND conditions. So fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory access for everybody that has I would say, a kind of essential facility. It could be a device, could be a road, could be an instrument. And the European Union will oblige all these holders of essential data to open these data for third parties, so as to ensure the switching function, so that the consumer can, who is in most cases the owner of the data, because most of these data are personal data, and the consumer should have the right, as to the Commission, to transport the data from one cloud or one system to another. So it's not the manufacturer of the device or the streets or the traffic center. It's the owner is the you and me. The data subject is the consumer or the professional user. And he will say to the third party, I want a new service, repair and maintenance or whatever, and I will ask my supplier of the cloud to switch the data from point A to point B, which is quite a challenge. Huh? Look to the GAFAs, what they are facing today. So that's one of the key principles in this Data Act. The second is about machine interoperability, so that we can read each other's data and understand, instead of today you need to be a rocket science to understand all these different languages.
Or a teenager.
Or a teenager, yeah, indeed.
Because they're coding like hell.
That's another forum. And demystification, you hinted to that, somebody here, yeah, I think Connie, it's about trust. Mm-hmm. I've been in many conferences where people say technology is great, they're going to help us. Yeah, okay, fine, probably yes. But what will you do when you have automated and non-automated vehicles in the same street? What will you do with connected and unconnected? Yeah? Will the consumer still have the right to have a dumb car or a dumb non-connected thing? Or will he be obliged to have the latest app and the latest login and whatever, face recognition and algorithms? Yeah? So that question also in Europe we are tackling through the demystification exercise that we are doing with Ertico in a lot of projects, and the trust factor. So, and trust is about transparency of algorithms, of systems, and it's easier said than done, of course, but we're all in the same boat for that, yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Just on the question of interoperability, shout out to the work of the MaaS Alliance and the paper that you issued in late 2021. A really good resource for those who are thinking about how to approach the question of interoperability. Laura Williamson, let's come back to the material world. Let's come back to things that are physical, that need energy, that are powered. All of this technology that we're talking about requires energy, especially the propulsive technologies that we use to move around. Transport has seen the largest growth in energy demand compared to all other sectors, nearly all of which has been met by fossil fuels. And this is something that is increasingly, we knew it was already a problem before, it's become increasingly even more of an issue. Are we in a position to change this reliance? How do you feel our readiness is right now? And what can be said about the contribution that renewable energy can make quickly to this change in our reliance on fossil energy?
Thank you. Yes, let's getting down to practicality. I was thinking about what you were saying, Joost, and about the interoperability of systems and thinking, and we've got to have the energy sources, the stable energy sources to make sure that that actually works. So that, once the lights go out, it's amazing what happens to democracy. Yeah, stepping back what you were saying, 97% of the transport sector is fossil fuel based. The penetration of renewables in the fossil fuel sector is, abhorrent, in the sense that it's been 1% increase over the past decade. Now, that's sort of the bad news. The good news is that there is increasing penetration of renewables in what we call the energy system, which is made up of the power, transport, heating, and cooling. The unfortunate part is that the majority of that penetration has been happening in the power sector. So yes, that's good when we're talking about maybe e-mobility and electronic or applications that require power, but it doesn't really address some of these other questions when we're looking at long-haul transport that cannot rely yet on electrification. So we need to be able to take what is happening in the power sector and see how we can translate that, how we can ramp that up into the transport sector. So currently we have just under 20% of the power sector is now fueled by renewable electricity. So that's great, as I said, for electric vehicles, maintenance of digitalized systems. But then how are we going to change that 3% into something much harder for the rest of the system? And I think one of the really big issues is the fact that we're seriously lacking, and this sort of gets a little bit to what Connie was saying, we're lacking the policies and the targets to drive that transition. It is possible, but we're lacking the correct signals, the correct market signals, but the correct policy signals that will help to increase that penetration for the non-electrified parts of the transport sector.
Mm-hmm. When we think about energy and transport, we often think about, of course, the propulsive energy, that energy that moves us. But when we think about technology in the transport sector, a lot of that is digital based. And digital services, global ICT, also consumes a lot of energy. Consumes about 1.5%, or contributes rather, to about 1.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. The maritime sector contributes about 2%, aviation about 2.8%. So it is within an order of magnitude of what we see as some hard to abate sectors. Now, here we're talking more generally about how electricity is produced. Can you talk a little bit about how the strategies that are more general to the electricity production and renewables' ability to contribute to that may play out over the long term, not just on the fossil fuel side for propulsive technology, but also for digital technologies?
Yeah, no, a good question, and that is where we also need to make sure that the efforts that are currently have been achieved in the power sector continue to increase. So, we already know that, over 80% of all newly installed capacity is now met by renewables, vastly surpassing fossil fuel and nuclear. So we need to keep up that momentum. We need to ensure that we have that linking between the power sector and the propulsive, the technologies and the energy for the propulsive sector. The hard to decarbonize sectors. But we also need to really increase the the share of renewables in the power sector. And I think, one of the things that we really need to, within the renewable energy sector, we have not been very good, and that's why it's great that you're bringing in the energy discussion into transport, is that we're very siloed. So we're very much looking at, so from the energy side, okay, what is the supply? What is it? How can we increase the supply? But we're not actually very much looking at the demand side. Who is using it? How are they using it? How does it need to be provided? How does it need to be structured? Where does it need to be placed? Should it be centralized? Should it be decentralized? Et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's one of the things when we're talking here about inclusive societies, if we're talking about sustainable transport, is that we need to have many more of these conversations for me to be able to say, I have some solutions from the energy side, you have some solutions from the transport side, we've got digitalization. How are we going to bring all these together? And how are we, what are the policies and the regulations that we need to have cities and national governments put in place in order to support that, that progression?
Absolutely. Spoiler alert, you asked, what is using it? Bitcoin. Connie, I'd like to turn back to you. We don't all interact with technologies in the same way. In our discussions, and not only in our discussions because it has been in the news, LA has used a gender lens to look at the way in which women and men use technology differently. Can you tell me a little bit more about this work that you've done, what it revealed, and then how you're using these learnings in the way in which you're shaping technology policy for Los Angeles?
So in Los Angeles in 2021, we released our Changing Lanes study. We actually looked at how the transportation system as a whole was serving women, not only technology, right? Our physical infrastructure as well, our community infrastructure to a degree. What we know is in Los Angeles, 51% of our population are women. And what we found unequivocally is that women feel like the system is not meeting their needs, which at its core means that we're not meeting the needs of more than half the population, right? Which was just bad for everyone, whether you're a woman or not. And I think things like how women travel, the trip chaining we do, the safety concerns that are unique to women, a lot of the solutions for that, those problems were not front and center when these systems were being planned. And that, sort of takes us back a little bit to, as we're having these conversations about how to advance the next level of any kind of technology. If you don't have the right problems in front of you, the right concerns in front of you, what you're developing is lacking. But one of the other things we discovered, which is incredibly powerful, I think, to this conversation we're having around how transport technology can be fully inclusive, we still have a gender divide amongst women with accessing smartphones. Mm-hmm. So as we're talking about all of these applications and services and how they're going to be utilized, when I'm looking at such a large segment of the communities that we serve, still having barriers to access to the most basic resources to reach these services, we really have to challenge ourselves, right? What are we developing and for whom? So I think that for us is incredibly powerful. We also found a gap in driver's licenses for women. And the gap gets bigger in both smartphones and in driver's licenses, the lower the income is of a particular community, and it is lower for Black and Latino women in Los Angeles. So this is something that we really need to contend with. As a department, we're absolutely looking at how we change the model in how we deliver our services, community engagement, and really getting into the community by using community-based organizations to really bridge that gap, working with partners, private sector partners, so that they can help provide the resources and we can help bridge the gap and get that information to the right people, I think is going to be key. And when I think about this, it also makes me think a little bit about the energy conversation and the points you were making right now, because I also think that the same can be said about the electrification conversation. The access to broadband in Los Angeles is not equitable. and where the private investments are taking place on electrification are not equitable. So, until we start, and obviously adoption of those tools is also not equitable. So until we start having those conversations that really challenge who is getting access to those services, we still have a lot of work to do.
And it's going to be a very similar follow-up question to the one I asked before, because here you're making visible a divide that wasn't necessarily, it was certainly felt, but wasn't certainly visible, not at the policy level, policymaker level. So when, again, you went to the mayor's office and said, this is what we're finding, what was the reception? What was can you describe a little bit how that was integrated and brought on board? So what were the mechanisms that you used, the stories that you told in order to make this evident for those that had not felt it before?
Well, I think, first and foremost, it was actually stories that got us to this place. I think that I cannot stress enough, data, you were talking a little bit about data. Data is rich and valuable, but it can also be skewed. And in particular, aggregate data doesn't allow us to pick apart and really identify some of these facts. So what we understood after doing this analysis, the difference of this analysis is we went deep in 3 communities. We used community-based organizations and residents to actually, through storytelling, really get us into what are the barriers in their daily lives to how they travel. And I think it's only through that sort of storytelling that we're able to actually uncover the pieces that we're missing. That makes it a lot easier for us to be able to talk to policymakers about some of these challenges, and we're having active conversations, right? I mean, access to driver's licenses is not something that usually a city transportation entity is handling, right? It's a state system that is providing driver's licenses. But increasingly, we know that there's a number of services, including transportation services, that we're providing that require access to a driver's license. For example, many of the women we spoke to in these communities made it pretty clear that owning a vehicle, having access to a vehicle, not owning a vehicle, having access to a vehicle was critical. Mm-hmm. That is something that they needed, right? We already have the largest EV car share program in the country, and we're looking to expand that. So we want to think strategically about how do we deploy those resources more rapidly in these communities where we know there's a need. Without a driver's license, these women can't access it. So we have to have those conversations with policymakers to say we need to establish those partnerships so that we can actually tackle the problems that we're finding on the ground. And again, I think that when you make it about people and about their very real needs, you humanize the conversation, and I think you do inspire more urgent action.
Connie, you're describing a type of cooperation that helps us guide the way in which we assess technologies and implement and the uptake of those technologies. Joost, I'd like to turn to you because cooperation is part of, and finding that consensus is part of what Ertico does. So can you talk a little bit about the cooperation models that you feel are essential in these discussions between energy and the transport community, between the telecoms and the transport community? How do you view those cooperations leading to these, ensuring that these technologies deliver on a better outcome for society?
Yeah, very good question. Thank you, Philip. And building on what I heard before, Ertico is a public-private partnership, has been established with the European Commission 30 years ago, so 3 decades ago, to do what? To do innovation in transport, which didn't exist as we see it today. But 30 years ago, it was about ADAS and about smart traffic, for example, but there were no apps, so that business didn't exist. Now, what we did with the Commission is we gathered 8 different sectors, well, different organizations. It's the public authorities, they're a large part of Ertico across Europe. It is ministries, cities, road authorities, traffic centers, so that's one part. The second is the OEMs, the vehicle manufacturers, the suppliers, tier 1, tier 2 suppliers, the users, obviously, but also the traffic and transport industry. Those who are providing the lane markings, the paint on the roads, the asphalt, the tarmac, but also the smart traffic lights. Yeah. And a new section that we created last year was the connectivity industry. We call it the connectivity industry, which is about telecoms, IT, cloud, edge computing, artificial intelligence, this world, the intangible world, if I can say so. And what we do is, based on European funded projects through Horizon Europe, Digital Europe, CEF projects, so implementing, showcasing smart mobility and sustainable mobility. Because the energy sector, what you mentioned, is very much present in our constituency. And it's not only about energy, the traditional energy providers, the production of energy and the distribution and transmission, but also the smart charging industry, the CPOs, yeah? How to assure interoperability amongst charging stations for vehicles, but also for heavy-duty vehicles. Yeah? What about the integration with the grid through data sharing? How to reserve a spot on the motorway where you can charge and actually slotting this thing. Yeah? Interesting question, quite complex. Also about all ecosystems are different. That's about access to data, of course, and data sharing. Yeah. So we do that through a very, I invite you to go to the website, article.com, it's easy. We have the European Congresses and the World Congress. We got one in Hamburg, this country, in October, the World Congress, 13,000 people. We have our European Congress next week in Toulouse, in France. Quite interesting, you will see showcasing of technology, public, private, and 100 sessions also. Like we have sessions here, we have 100 of these special interest sessions, mostly with policymakers. Yeah. And to please LA, we have the next the World Congress in LA in September this year, so I will be there as well. Looking forward to see you all there. So that's the project part in smart mobility, city mobility, urban mobility, the energy and transport and logistics, because we haven't touched upon that, but logistics is very much important as well, the whole digital revolution and energy revolution as well. Yeah. And finally, advocacy. That's an example of what we do. Advocacy, like you write papers, develop white papers, ideas, that's also what we do. Please.
I'm going to quickly turn to the room to get a read of the room. We're going to come back to you as well for some questions afterwards. But at this stage in the conversation, of course, you came in with an idea about technology, but maybe that idea's evolved. I'd just like to see a show of hands. How many of you would consider yourselves technology optimists versus technology cautionists? So how many of you feel that you are technology optimists? And how many of you feel that you are technology cautionists? That's about a little more optimist than cautionist, including the entire panel. So read the room, read the room. Yeah, absolutely. Wait, so you are cautionist, optimist? Optimist, okay. So yeah, I think there's a good balance. That's good to see. I'm going to turn to Hyun-se. In some way, we're in the Cambrian period of business models. There's so many business models that are popping up and that are developing. Many of them will fail, as in all business cycles. Some of them will continue. But I'd like to hear your view on what are some of the new business models that you feel are necessary or can contribute to providing universal mobility.
So if we see the business model itself, we see how we can make maybe, what can we call maybe maximum profit and some transportations. But what we see is making those accessible universal mobility more a financially sustainable one. Because in terms of financial barriers in achieving the accessible mobility, even in Seoul, South Korea, with more than 25 million people in metropolitan regions, just one central metro line is profitable financially, and other is subsidized by the public agencies and governments. And if we see, we cannot really repeat the same infrastructure investments and so on, but rather it'll be a business model based on the connected infrastructures, as mentioned, and also the connected infrastructures in cooperation with different connected vehicles, like autonomous shuttles and different infrastructure, different transportation means, should we say. And this will be enabled by efficient fleet management. And this, of course, requires different connectivity for the vehicles and also the infrastructures. And we do see that to achieve these kind of sustainable business models and for the accessible and universal mobility, we do need a lot of investments in connected infrastructures and also interoperability, for sure. Not just actually making a more ride-hailing services or more mobility as a service aggregators and more autonomous vehicle themselves. Rather, we should more focus on leveraging the existing infrastructures and making connected that the lower levels of autonomous vehicles can actually serve more regions than just making those vehicles themselves getting smart rather than cars not talking to each other. Yeah.
It is, as we were discussing earlier, a real integration task that we face. Laura, sometimes history moves slowly. Sometimes it moves quite rapidly. And I think right now we're in one of these phases of acceleration. It always was evident that we had to rapidly decarbonize society. In the last 2 months, as I said, it's become quite evident that we need to immediately decarbonize certain parts of our society by 2024. How do you feel, or what is your view on the pace at which renewables can help that immediate decarbonization? And where are some of the challenges in leveraging renewables to handle that immediate decarbonization that has become a pressing concern in the last 2 months?
Thank you. Are renewables in place to help with rapid decarbonization? Yes. Why is it not happening? I think fundamentally it's because we're siloed. You know, within the energy sector is like every other sector. There are players, there are invested players, there are players who have market, not fragmentation, but they occupy a certain part of the market. And I think what we really need to say is it's renewables. It's renewables first, then technology second. We need all renewables in place. We need to change how we consume. We need energy efficiency. We really need energy efficiency. We cannot continue to consume the way we're consuming. And then we need to overlay that with renewables, all renewables. We need all players at the table. And then we need to have those discussions about what are the shares, where, so for example, you know, where is PV maybe going to be the lead, supplemented by wind in the evening and pumped hydro, pumped storage in the evening? Where are we going to have battery? Where is it going to be centralized? Where is it going to be decentralized? And then linked to that is really who are the users? In every single conversation where you're so fixated on what are we providing, but what about the users? You know, and so part of the rapid decarbonization is also understanding what is the demand. We all have different demands, even at a personal level. You know, in the morning, my household has very low energy demand. I have 3 boys. I can barely get them to like run a toothbrush over their teeth before they're out the door. My husband is an academic who teaches online in the US. He's not up until midday. So for us,
also hard to get him to brush his teeth.
Also hard to get him to brush. He does comb his hair though because of the camera. But you know, so in our household, I would be totally happy to either have a higher energy price in the morning or have less access to energy services versus somebody else, this gentleman here in the wheelchair who may need an elevator to get out of his apartment, or somebody else who has young children. So, you know, we also have to understand what the energy is being used for and why, and how can we then make those balances. It is not a question of technology. It is not a question of money. It is a question of political will. We've seen this, right? Let's look at COVID. Within 6 months, we had a vaccine. Now, there was work that was going on, and you heard at different national levels, we have to test, we have to make sure, all good cautionary statements and approaches. But it got done. Why did it get done? Because the political imperative was there. People were dying. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, but people are dying.
Absolutely.
People are dying. They may not be dying as quickly, but they are dying from air pollution. They are dying from lack of thermal applications to heat or cool their places.
And from crashes, of course.
And what?
And from crashes, of course.
And from crashes.
1.3 million people.
So, so we really do, I mean, this, but it is not seen at the political level as something that needs the same sort of level of political urgency. So I think, yes, it can be done, but it requires political will. It requires speaking to the providers and the users. It also is about understanding what are the needs and how we can have these conversations. And you know what? We need to ask the tough questions. It's only by asking the tough questions that we find out where we're in agreement, and then we can build on that agreement to try and address where we may have disagreements, or we may have political different priorities, etc. So, yes, but...
I'm going to come back to questions. Joost, you also had something to say on this.
Very interesting, Laura, and I fully agree. On the user, and it's not a supply and demand, it's actually the demand-driven thing. But talking about the role of governments, the role of public authorities in this discussion on renewables, on AFIR, for example, the new infrastructure regulation on charging infrastructure in the parliament now. Where do we put this debate? Where do we put it? And where do we sense the criticality? Is it here? Is it in Davos? Is it in United Nations? Or is it at a regional level or local level? And every time I discuss with cities, for example, on urban mobility, yeah, they say, well, that's my territory. I'm responsible for that, so that's my monopoly, quote unquote, for regulation and for urban vehicle access regulations, etc., and low emission zones. Yeah. When I talk about telecoms, that's European competence because we need seamless networks, cross-border and ubiquity and bandwidth and so on. Yeah. But transport is traditionally very local competence or very national competence. Yeah. And when you talk about charging infrastructure and renewables, well, you have the incumbents, of course, pleading their case and then maybe holding a bit their case as well. But I don't see really the criticality at an international level to make it happen. I see the COPs, okay, fine. These are nice political statements. But there's no power, there's no, I would say, legal power, binding measures to make it happen. We have the discussion now on the city mission. We want cities, 100 cities, to be climate neutral, zero climate neutral in 2030. It is after tomorrow. Quite an ambition, yeah? And yeah, Europe wants to have programs and guidelines, but they don't have the power to impose things, yeah? It's like the CO2 regulations on vehicles, they have the power to regulate CO2 in vehicles, that's true. But on infrastructure to charge these vehicles, the electric vehicles, it's not a European competence today. It will be, hopefully. So we are back on the table. Where do we want to put this debate, and what kind of subsidiarity do we still want, and what kind of power do we want to give to a higher authority? And that's political courage as well. And we need a sense of criticality, and I think you described it well. It's now. It's not tomorrow. Yeah. Sorry.
I said I was going to ask a question about questions, and I'm actually going to ask a question about how we ask questions about technology and for whom our answers are relevant. Technology is almost always an answer to a question, and that question usually is, wouldn't it be great if, then you fill in the blank. And that's how innovations and technologies emerge. But I'd like to see what your take is on the questions behind those questions. And I'll take the case of automated vehicles. We can ask ourselves, what is the question that the self-driving car is an answer to? And clearly, we know that one of those questions is, how can we make driving safer? We don't yet know to what degree automated cars can answer that question. We have confidence that it can answer that question. But more fundamentally, if the question is, how can we make driving safer? Then is the automated car the first best, the fifth best, the 100th best answer to that question? And we know that there are tested technologies and strategies that we can already deploy. So my question to you, to all of the panel, is, do you feel we are asking the right questions about technology? And if so, do you feel that we're providing the right answers to those questions, and especially taking into account for whom those answers are relevant? Connie, I know that this is something that you struggle with as well in Los Angeles. Maybe what is your take on how to approach the questions that we ask about technology?
I feel like this is the theme of a lot of my responses today, but I think it's because it's important, right? In particular, from a city lens, we are weighing every advancement through the lens of how is it going to serve the residents. And in particular, as we're talking about universal basic mobility, the challenge goes deeper. And it isn't just how is it going to serve our city, but in particular, how does it help us close the gaps for those that have been the least served traditionally by our system? Because if we can fix the problems there, then we lift the situation for everyone citywide. I think this is why we've really broken the model in how we're doing our community engagement and really going deep, and we are enabling the expertise of our hyper-local residents. We're paying them for their time and their expertise so that they can come and tell us how we should be deploying our investments, how we should be deploying our infrastructure. So we can break away from the model where the planning happens to a community and not with or for a community. And so the question is, how much of that is happening as new technologies are being advanced? Whose problems are we actually looking to solve? Who are the individuals that are informing the next layer of advancement? When we're thinking about the technology, are we thinking about the next new thing? Oh, I think you set it up as, wouldn't it be great if? What about we need to solve problem X because it is an issue today? It isn't an amenity. It is a necessity. And so I think that is a huge challenge for how we're thinking about technology as a whole, and in particular when we're talking about transport technology, because the stakes are so high. You talk about automated vehicles. The capacity, yesterday I was on a panel and sort of listening to some of the leading AV private companies talking about the potential for blind individuals to have access to transportation. Seniors, my father has epileptic seizures, hasn't driven in 5 years. The idea that he can have ease of mobility, that maybe he could plan a trip, which is something he hasn't been able to do for quite some time. That capacity for good is incredibly powerful, but is it driving the advancement of technology? And I think that can be applied to a lot of the points that Laura was making around energy as well, right? And sort of deploying of these new infrastructure that we need to reach our goals, right? I think that we need to be thinking about not only the urgency, but the urgency for where and for whom, I think, has to be a part of the conversation if we really want to meet this idea of serving an inclusive society through transportation.
Laura, you wanted to say something about the questions that we're asking.
Yeah, to add just to what you were saying about the questions being asked and, who's at the table, making sure that this technology, what this technology is supposed to be doing is we're really identifying who should be at the table. And I think also too, just adding in from the renewable energy perspective, one of the things from our side is we have to become much better at identifying what is it that renewable energy technologies can do to serve the objectives of something else. You don't own a PV panel or a wind turbine because you want to own a PV panel. I mean, what are you going to do with it? Make a table out of it? It's what it generates. It's what it brings. And so I think we have to always think from this technology will enable us, will be a vector for a larger application, a larger objective.
I want to add one more thing too. This was, Joost, some of the first comments you were talking about as far as digital policy and how we really sort of are thinking about those questions as well, because I think it's important. I think part of the reason why for Los Angeles, technology policy has been so critical and so important is because we do understand the responsibility we have to actually try and shape that dialogue, right? The development of a tool like the mobility data specification was specifically developed so that as a city we could receive this new advancement in micromobility without compromising some of our critical policy goals like safety, equity, sustainability. We need to have the same sort of nimbleness that the private sector does in being able to inform that conversation, have the data to have that information be accurate and be useful. And then we have to have the courage and the willingness to work together towards actually reaching those policy goals. So it's a balance of inviting the creativity while still holding accountable for those goals. I think that's really important.
Joost, Hyunse, what are your takes on the way in which we're addressing some of these questions or not?
Yeah, I just wanted to pinpoint on automated vehicles. I've been working on that quite long in the automotive industry. What does it serve? Yeah. Does it help congestion? Does it help efficiency and throughput? Not sure. It's about individual mobility versus collective mobility. And automation up to autonomous, level 5, can go hand in hand with shared mobility. Mobility on demand, as you say in the US. Yeah. And there we can have slot management of vehicles. Your father can go with somebody else to the same trip and putting people somewhere. So it's about productivity, probably will increase. You can do other things than be attentive to traffic. And probably more inclusion. I fully agree with that. But it's about shared. The shared connotation should be there. Probably the same with energy usage as well. Efficient use of the last mile essential facility that you have. Because actually every vehicle has an essential spot on the place and occupies a space, which is quite scarce as well to this place. So you need to better utilize this. So, and who should regulate this? That's a bit the question. What's the role of a road authority for the vehicles on the road? Yeah? Or the role of a city for the traffic in the city? Is it enabling the safety of the asphalt, the tarmac, the road signs, the information variable messages sign? Is that the only role? Or is it the beholder of the sustainability agenda of the state and the society saying, well, I will not allow these kind of vehicles between this and this time slot in the day. Or I will allow platooning during that type of the day or only on that space on the street. And that's a new discussion we have now with these authorities. They used to be the beholder of safety for the roads and the city of traffic and so on, but they're becoming societal regulatory authorities for what's happening on my territory, also from an energy production point of view. Absolutely. So that's an interesting paradigm that we're all facing through.
Absolutely. Hyunse, before I turn to Hyunse, very quickly, I'm going to turn to the audience right after Hyunse responds. So if you do have questions, be ready to ask them, and there'll be a microphone that will be roving in the audience for that. So Hyunse, what is your take on your feeling about the questions that we're asking and the answers that we're giving?
So I think there are a lot of initiatives and certain solutions for each questions that we're making. Is it financially sustainable? Is it environmentally sustainable? Is it inclusive enough, and so on? I do believe that we do have a lot of technologies that can make transportations more inclusive, but to actually accelerate to make transportations more inclusiveness of the transportation itself, I think we need to build a platform that actually assures different stakeholders to test out the new technologies that will help more connected infrastructures and vehicles to work each other. And also in connected infrastructure, it also involves the energy infrastructures and so on. And also so that we can actually provide those different public and private entities to actually test out and manage those different initiatives in the future. Because as a cybersecurity firm, we have been rolling out different initiatives and devices, vehicle modules to test out the future level 4, level 5 vehicles. But we don't have a technical assurance platform whether we can test out those kind of future mobility services on the roads and so on. And it has been a gray area. So I think we do need from different public and private sectors to have these kind of certain technical assurance platform. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'll turn to the audience now. Are there questions that you would like to ask the panel? And by questions, I don't mean statements. So you'll have, of course, an opportunity to speak to them afterwards. But please, I see already a question here. And please let us know who you are.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Ferry Smith. I work for the Royal Dutch Touring Club, ANWB, and also chairing the Policy Commission of FIA. It's a very interesting discussion. Thank you for that, and many interesting insights. I'm a technology optimist, by the way. The question what I want to put forward, but just let me, just a short statement. I totally agree with Connie about listening to the user, the consumer. That's important. The question is, how do we prioritize the difference between individual and collective needs? For instance, the enormous challenge we have on CO2 reduction. And the second question I have is to Laura. I totally agree that we have to do more about renewables. How feasible is this? We have billions of vehicles with an ICE out there. How are we capable to make that change in due time? Because we don't have that time. Those vehicles are running around and they won't scrap it in 10 years' time. So the question is, how feasible is the transition to renewables and what can we do to, well, speed that up?
Connie? The first was for you, the question about what is the, let me just recall it. The first question was?
I'm sorry, yes, I didn't hear it was for me, I apologize.
It was on the balance of, that's right, on the
Yes. balance
of societal outcomes versus individual outcomes. How do you
Exactly.
manage that in the role and the act of governance?
And who should make that prioritization? Is that on a global level? Is it on a city level? Who is accountable for this?
Well, I'd like to think that at all layers, we can challenge ourselves, both in the public sector and in the private sector, to be driven by collective needs. In particular, as we continue to hear the really, what should be terrifying statistics about where we are and how quickly we need to move to actually make an impact. But one thing I find myself saying increasingly is we have to be very honest as we are asking people to make changes to help address these very serious concerns. Again, who are we putting that burden on? And are we asking the most of the people who have the least amount of choice? You know, so again, when we did our gender equity study, we realized that while the analysis, the department is incredibly committed to reducing the reliance of, on single occupancy vehicles. I already gave you guys a stat in Los Angeles. Almost 90% of our city owning vehicles and almost 70% commuting primarily by themselves in a vehicle every day, right? So those statistics are not, our statistics we're very serious about changing. But we also have to listen to the idea that there is a segment of the population that needs a vehicle of some sort. And we should not put the burden of fixing the problem on the ones who have the least amount of flexibility to address it. So I think, you know, Laura put some great ideas out there, right? For those who have flexibility of choice, let's give them those choices. And I think this is where also, not just the public sector, again, I will double down, I think at every level, we need to have a sense of urgency. But I think we need to also challenge the private sector. When you're doing your research and development, are you thinking about solving the collective problems, or are you thinking about creating more ease and more choice for those who already have, an excess of choice?
Laura, on this question of renewables.
Very good question, and I think that, you know, this is why we have to start now. I mean, we have, unfortunately, a built-in system where we have combustion engines that are going to be on the road for another 10, 15, and if you service your car well, and maybe another 20 years. And this is why we really need to get these policies, these policies and targets in place now. 2021 was the first time where transport policies were not added. So we're actually going backwards. So countries are actually at the national level are not setting these transport policies, renewable energy transport policies. So, so what am I trying to say? So we need to set the right market signals. We need to put the policies in place and the targets in place that are going to help drive this change. But they also have to be really consistent, and I think this is where we get this tension between the public and the private sector, is the private sector is in business to make money. The public sector is there to regulate and ensure that we live in healthy, safe communities. And so how do we reconcile those? There are only 8 countries in the world, I was just quickly looking up the stats, that have targeted bans on fossil fuel and renewable energy policies for 100% RE power, electricity targets. So, if you're going to ban, you also need to make sure you put in place the option. And it's this kind of synchronicity that we need on the policy front to send the right signals, to drive the private sector, and also setting at the policy level, what is the intent? What are we trying to do, and how are we going to do it? So I think one of the challenges we really face now is very short-sighted. What are we going to do for the next product or the next election cycle? And so we're yo-yoing around, and we really need to get those policies and targets in place to then send the right market signals to really get that filled with the technologies and the approaches that are there. It's all there. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. We're just not very good at getting the pieces, the pieces together. And again, just one last thing, sorry, because it's really important, and I see Benoit Lebeau sitting here. We have got to be energy efficiency. We have to, in everything we do, from the technology side, everything we're doing, energy efficiency needs to be first, followed by the fuel input second. We will never get anywhere unless we change how we consume.
I hope that when we're putting together this jigsaw puzzle, we've already got the corners in, and we can work our way in. Excellent. You had a comment on that as well.
I wanted to come back on another point, and not about energy efficiency, but data efficiency. The immense, I would say, tapping of potential on private industry data. Yeah? Data held by private companies, transport, non-transport companies. How to make this data available for the public sector, in an anonymized way, of course, aggregated way. There's still a hell of a job to do, because every company is sitting, and the hyperscalers mostly, literally sitting on a goldmine of data. Yeah? Using that data for the good purpose, financial purposes, for the private company purposes, but they can unlock the potential for public purposes. Yeah? And that's a question of market failure. Where does the public policy steps in? Where does LA want to regulate or to step into where the private industry is not active? But that could be one of them. Yeah? Next to the energy efficiency probably and the decarbonization. So yeah, that's another thought.
We have a very brief 3 minutes to finalize and wrap up. So one more question from the audience, please. And a quick round of responses from the panelists. Please introduce yourself and your question.
Yes, my name is Mariana. I'm a PhD student in Paris, working on mobility as a service and how to integrate active modes to this innovation on transport. And speaking of data, I would like to ask to this everyone in the panel, because I think that your perspectives would be different and very interesting to see, on how to address the data production and data management that these transportation innovations are dealing with and require, that at the same time are bringing issues and will bring more issues, since digitalization is only going to keep on this trend. So how giving users back some of the value that this data is producing, since they are being the producers of data through this type of mobility solutions. So are there already reflections on this at the city level, or for those that deal with cybersecurity, or for those who deal with ITS? So
I think, of course, that is a question that would require an entire hour and a half other discussion, but I'd like some quick responses on data production. And I think one of the points that came out in our discussions is that not everyone is present in the data because they don't interact with digital systems or even transport systems at large. So what about also those that are invisible in the data? Quick reactions to this question, and then maybe you can speak afterwards. I'll start with Joost, but do keep it short. We are at the end of our session now.
Very good question. We have this discussion with the Mobility as a Service Alliance. Yeah? Who has the data that are essential to the switchability, so to switching functions amongst the transport modes? A bit like the electric charging discussion as well. So the first thing is we should get away from the closed API approach, that everybody sits on the data and the closed ecosystem. So we should open that. Easier said than done, because private industry partners like my members, some of my members say, well, I've invested in that, I want return on investment, and I have my capital on it. Why should I share it with somebody else and open my monopoly, quote unquote, of clients to somebody else? But it's like CITS, cooperative ITS systems. The more participants you have in the system, it's 1 + 1 is 3 and not 2. And that's what we could do with data.
I would agree. This is a long topic, so I'll try to be very quick. The City of Los Angeles has a lot of experience in thinking about data and the return on investment that we need to ensure is being provided to the communities that we serve. So with our data policies in place, which prioritize personal privacy, but require information from companies who want to operate on the public right-of-way. It's one lever that we have, right, to guarantee that the users are seeing a return on the investment for the data that they're providing, right? It is ensuring that we can give you a better service on that public right-of-way, that we're responsible for managing, that we're addressing things like congestion or safety or emissions by using our regulatory levers, because we have access to that data. So it is just one small way, but yes, it's a much larger conversation.
You can say a quick response to this broad world of data production, data management.
Yeah, thanks for the great question. I believe that to make an open collaboration possible, we do need a trust when we actually share our personal or vehicular informations. And we do believe that there are a lot of initiatives that is trying to actually regulate or form an architecture that can actually prevent from misbehaviors to happen in terms of open data sharing. So I believe those kind of initiatives will help the future open collaborations in terms of mobility data sharings. Yeah.
Excellent. Laura?
So just quickly adding to Horst's, 1 + 1 = 3, REN21 produces what's called the Renewables Global Status Report. It's completely open source data. It's built on a community of over 3,000 people who contribute the knowledge and the data that they have. It's grown from 30 pages to over 300 pages. And it is the reference source for the renewable energy industry on what are the trends and developments. And so this is not personal data, but it just goes to show the power of data and the power of sharing, because in the end, everybody benefits from it. So I just think, yes, there's privacy issues which have to be addressed, but the power of collective data and knowledge cannot be underestimated.
And I'll just take the prerogative of being the moderator to say that, of course, this issue of data reporting, of data sharing, of pushing out machine-readable rules and regulations is all part of the data architecture, the data infrastructure that Joost was answering a question on earlier. The MaaS Alliance, Urtico is, of course, working on this with its members. The International Transport Forum as well is helping to design some of the principles, to think about what should be the principles that should guide data reporting, data sharing, and machine-readable law and regulation. So please feel free to contact anyone on the panel, ourselves included. So Hyun-Se Lee, Joost Van Tom, Connie Janos, and Laura Williamson, thank you so much for having had this conversation with me, with the ITF, amongst yourselves, with the audience. There is a Japanese author that I like to quote when we think about difficult topics, and that author is Haruki Murakami. And he wrote a book called, he was a long-distance runner, What Do I Think About When I Think About Running a Marathon? And I hope that what we've heard today here has helped you think about what it is that you think about when you think about transport and technology and a better society. And I know that I have changed my thinking about it from the conversations that we have. And again, a big round of applause for our audience, and a big round of applause for you for having come despite the dancing last night. All right, thanks so much. Yes, Matteo, and a big thanks for Matteo Craglia, who did all of the back office work to make this possible.